I help leaders build cultures of belonging where love, forgiveness, and learning inspire a happier, more connected world.
And the fact that it's WD-40, this funny company that no one would ever imagine.
So that's my purpose. That's what I get up to do every day. Everything that I'm asked to do has to go through that lens, because we need a happier world right now, Randy, and business not only has the opportunity, but I believe the responsibility to create a place where people go to work every day, they make a contribution to something bigger than themselves, they learn something new, they're protected and set free by a compelling set of values, and they go home happy. Because happy people build happy families build happy communities, and happy communities build a happy world, and we need a happy world, and it starts right at the door of business.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Sparks of Gratitude podcast. I am your host, Randy Sparks. And as you know, gratitude can save and change lives. And we have invited to the conversation one of the most inspiring people I've heard. And his name is Garry Ridge. Welcome to the conversation, Garry.
G'day, Randy. It's so good to be with you. Thank you for inviting me along.
Well, it is such a pleasure. And let me introduce everybody to Garry. So you may recognize this blue can of lube right here. It stops squeaks. But Garry, for at least 25 years, was the CEO of the WD-40 company. And every time I see this blue can, I think that there is so much more behind that. And after this conversation, I hope you will too. Garry is also an author. He's an adjunct professor at University of San Diego. He runs The Learning Moment, which is a coaching organization. You can maybe talk about that, but I think the title, The Learning Moment, is maybe a large part of what we're going to talk about today, Garry. So, Garry, maybe to get this started, what is inspiring you today?
Well, it's my purpose. I'm so grateful I had the opportunity to serve the people, the tribe at WD-40 for 25 years. But as I often say today, I've just completed my 25-year apprenticeship in leadership. So now I need to put it to work. So in doing that, I reflected some time ago, what's my purpose in life now? And my purpose is I help leaders build cultures of belonging where love, forgiveness, and learning inspire a happier, more connected world. So that's my purpose. That's what I get up to do every day. Everything that I'm asked to do has to go through that lens, because we need a happier world right now, Randy. And business not only has the opportunity, but I believe the responsibility to create a place where people go to work every day, they make a contribution to something bigger than themselves, they learn something new, they're protected and set free by a compelling set of values, and they go home happy. Because happy people build happy families build happy communities, and happy communities build a happy world. And we need a happy world, and it starts right at the door of business.
Well, that is quite a beginning to this conversation, your purpose. Could you tell me a little bit about how over the last 25 plus years, you said you finished your apprenticeship in leadership with the WD-40 company over 25 years. What helped you refine what you've just defined as your purpose?
We as leaders in organizations have a responsibility to help those we have the privilege to lead step into the best version of their personal self. So our job is not to be a manager, it's to be a coach. And, I often used to introduce myself as, "G'day, I'm Garry Ridge. I'm the consciously incompetent, probably wrong and roughly right, chairman and CEO of WD-40 Company, and I need all the help I can get." Which is really why my new book is called Any Dumbass Can Do It, because, I'm a dumbass. And in fact, I have a new title. I've given myself a title. I'm the Dean of Dumbassery. But let me take you back a little bit, Randy, to kind of the aha moment of all this. Back in 1994, I moved from Sydney, Australia to the US to not be CEO of WD-40, but to be head of international growth. And I had worked for them in Australia since 1987. I'd actually been with the company for 35 years in total. And we had a dream that we could take that little blue and yellow can with a little red top that you showed earlier to the world. Because back then the brand was basically a US brand with sprinkles of business in other places. So in 1994, I moved over here. And then in 97, the then CEO retired. And for some stupid reason, the board of directors of a public company thought this Aussie bloke might be okay. And I knew how to market the brand. I knew that we could identify end users that needed us. And if we did that, I knew how to make them aware of the brand, and I knew how to build distribution. But what I needed was a passionate group of people, because micromanagement is not scalable. And honestly, I struggled with that a little bit. And I was on a flight from Los Angeles to Sydney on a Qantas 747, 38,000 feet above the South Pacific Ocean in the middle of the night. And as you do when you travel, you take stuff with you to read. And I was reading. And I read a quote that was attributed to the Dalai Lama, and it said, "Our purpose in life is to make people happy. If we can't make them happy, at least don't hurt them." And I thought, wow, that's true. How can we not hurt people in business? And then probably an hour later, I read something of Aristotle's, and Aristotle said, "Pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work." And I thought, yes, if we can make a job pleasurable, if we can get out of this theory of work-life balance, which tells you that one of them is out of balance, if both of them could be in balance, what could we do? I still didn't know how to do it, Randy. And I got back to San Diego, and I was reading something in the local newspaper, and it talked about a master's degree at the University of San Diego, and it was put together by the guru of servant leadership, Dr. Ken Blanchard, and the business school. And I thought, I'm going to go to the information session on this. So I went to the information session, and I heard Ken speak. And Ken Blanchard said, "The problem with most MBA programs is they just get people in the head. We've got to start getting people in the heart." And I went, got it. So here I am. I'm already the CEO of a US public company, and I went back to school. I went back and I did a 2-year master's degree in leadership. And that's where I really was able to absorb some of the principles of servant leadership. Ken Blanchard and I became such good mates. We wrote a book together subsequent to that. I ended up being on his board for 10 years, and that was a great experience. It was my opportunity just to suck more of the learning out. And that was it. We started to implement all of those principles of servant leadership. And so I owe my success to many people, but to 3, the Dalai Lama, Aristotle, and Ken Blanchard. And Ken says, well, I guess I'm in okay company.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And if you're going to be able to write a book with any of those, I mean, one of them's not around anymore. One of them's harder to get to. And Ken Blanchard ain't bad.
Exactly. He's 85 years old now. I went to his birthday party a few weeks ago, and we're still good mates. And when we're in town together, we actually play 9 holes of golf on a Wednesday afternoon. So I adore the man, and I am so grateful I was able to, become his friend.
Well, you've answered a question I wanted to ask, which is, who are some of the people that have influenced you that you are grateful for? And you've given 3. I want to comment on that Aristotle quote that you mentioned. Could you repeat that for me, please?
Pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work.
Okay, so I need to tell you this story. Hello, everyone. I want to thank you so much for listening to the Sparks of Gratitude podcast. If you like what you're listening to, will you please hit that like, subscribe to this, and tell us what you like about it in the comments. That'll help us get great guests and keep this thing going. Now back to our interview. Ever since I was a young child, my grandfather would always repeat this quote to me that was taught to him. It was my great-great-grandfather coined this phrase as his slogan in life. His name was Ole Olsen, and he was from Norway, and he immigrated in the 1800s to the United States and eventually to Utah, where I live. And he has this quote that he says, "If work is not a pleasure, then what pleasure has the working man?"
Yeah,
and he lived by that his entire life. And my grandfather would teach that to me. And when I was a kid, I thought, that makes absolutely no sense. Why would work be a pleasure? And, as I get older, I feel like I spend so much of my time in this. And when have I been unhappy in a workplace? It's because I didn't feel appreciated. I didn't feel like it was meaningful. I didn't feel like I had purpose.
Exactly.
And so how can you comment on what you learned and implemented on giving that and creating that culture in your career?
So, I've learned that there are absolutely 3 things that people want in a work relationship. You hit them on the head. 1, they want to feel like and know that they belong. Everybody on this listening to us or watching us today has left a job, a party or even a relationship because they didn't feel like they belong. Now, here's why that's so important today is we just went through this epidemic that caused us to unconnect from people. And we're humans. We need human connection. So number one, people want to know and be treated like they belong. Number two, they want to know they matter. So is the work that I'm doing making a difference? Do I matter? And how do we do that? Well, we reward and applaud people and we coach them and we help them to get there. And number three, they want to make choices. People want to make their own choices. And that's why a hierarchical set of values is so important in an organization, because you heard my little spiel earlier, it protects people and sets them free. So I think that it's so important that we as leaders create this environment where people know they belong, we show them they matter, and we help them make their own choices, that we give them the freedom that they need to do the great work that they need to do, because micromanagement is not scalable.
You mentioned there that it's values that give freedom, that set people free, and having these values, and you say hierarchical values in an organization, and that actually sets people free because micromanaging is not scalable. How do you define or discover those values, and then how do you implement and get buy-in? And then lastly, how does that create freedom?
So how do you create the values? Well, it's a process that you go through in the organization of determining what is a value. A value is something that is more important than something else. So, a WD-40 company, we talked about our values, and we did a lot of work in putting our values together. And we included people in that conversation. We included people in the process of actually putting our values together. And then we lived those values on a daily basis. So our number one value at WD-40 was we value doing the right thing. Our number two value is we value creating positive, lasting memories in all of our relationships. Our number three was we value making it better than it is today. Our four was we value succeeding as a tribe while excelling as individuals. Our number five was we value owning it and passionately acting on it. And our number six was we value sustaining the WD-40 company economy, which is the one that points to profitability. Now, these were hierarchical. Number one, two, and three were more powerful than four, five, and six. So if you had to make a decision in the organization, you would put the scenario through the lens of the value. So we'd say, this is the decision. Is it doing the right thing? Now, each one of these values had a description of what it means underneath it, because being a global company, doing the right thing in the US might look a little different to doing the right thing in China. So we had to be very descriptive in saying what that meant. But people could sit down and say, well, this is a decision we need to make. Let's put it through the lens, number one, are we doing the right thing? And if the answer is yes, the next question is, well, will this create a positive, lasting memory? And then we'd put it through that lens. So wherever you were in the world, 24 hours a day, you had the freedom to make any decision you needed to make without quacking up the hierarchy and calling whoever you needed to say, can I make this decision? Well, if you make the decision based on our values, we'll back you, because we know you're going to make the decision that we would support globally in the organization.
And when you came into that position at WD-40, was this a wholesale restructuring of these values, and was it a struggle for people to buy into that?
Yes, it was a complete change, and it wasn't because what was there was bad. Is what was there was not going to take us to be a global company. We were a US-based company that you could just about pull everybody into a room and communicate with. Now we're going to go to 176 countries around the world, and the sun will never set on us. So we had to have a different structure. And yes, when we started to roll out our purpose, our culture stuff, there were people that kind of went, whoa, I'm not used to having this freedom. I'm not used to making decisions. I want to quack up the hierarchy. That means if I make a decision, I'm going to have to be responsible for my actions. Bingo. Yes, you are. So yeah, it didn't, I have a really good friend that I admire. His name is Charlie Maloof. He's the CEO of Broad River Retail, the Ashley furniture stores out in the Charlotte and whatever area. And he shared a quote with me. He said, you cannot microwave culture. It takes a crockpot approach. And he is so right. You cannot sprinkle fairy dust on an organization and change the culture. You have to make sure that you have the elements in place, and then you have to work on that. When I was a young lad back in Australia going to high school, my science teacher in a science class one day gave me a petri dish. And they said, what we're going to do is we're going to grow culture in this petri dish. So there are the two things you have to remember. Number one, what ingredients do you put in the petri dish? And number two, what are you going to do as the owner of the petri dish to help the good ingredients grow and stop the toxins from attacking? And when you get down to it, it's that simple. If you have the right ingredients in the petri dish to grow a great culture, and you consistently feed the good elements and treat the toxins, you will build a sustainable culture that has a highly engaged workforce who love what they do, and the end result will be happy people going home and a great economic outcome.
So that brings something where you describe, if you have the right ingredients. To me, you have a phrase that you've repeated. Maybe you can share that with me, but it has to do with attracting, your tribe, and if you have the vibe.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, now
it's
I've put
gone
us
from
both on the spot.
your
Your
vibe
vibe
attracts
there you go.
your tribe.
Your
Your
vibe
vibe
attracts your
attracts
tribe.
your tribe. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so there's two things in that are important or meaningful to me. One is that vibe, the ingredients that you described, that you're setting the stage for that to fuel what you want, and then that's going to attract who you want to be part of this tribe. But the second thing is that you call it a tribe, and language is important. And so why do you use the word tribe, and why is that meaningful to you?
So, you could use the word family if you like, but I use the word tribe because tribes existed at the beginning of mankind. And if you think about a tribe, it's a group of people that come together to protect and feed each other. That's the definition. The tribal description has nothing to do with any indigenous group. It's tribalism is the birth of mankind. Now, the reason that I continued on that is that once I thought, well, what kept these people together, thousands of years ago when Ugg the caveman was the ruler of the world? And I then went and I actually spoke to and interviewed a number of tribal type leaders, both in Australia and Fiji. And the number one thing that came out was, what's the number one responsibility of a tribal leader? Well, interestingly enough, the number one responsibility of a tribal leader is to be a learner and a teacher. Because if you are learning and teaching those within the tribe, then the tribe will perform better and will succeed over time. So, if I was to, align that with some indigenous group, I could align it to the indigenous Australians where I came from. And if we were to observe a group of indigenous Australians many years ago, the tribal leader would be teaching the tribe members to throw a boomerang. Why? Because the boomerang was the tool of survival. So I was able to link the fact that our tribal promise is a group of people that come together to protect and feed each other, and our responsibility as tribal leaders is to be learners and teachers. So our job is to help those we have the privilege to lead step into the best version of their personal self. So, that was, and there are other attributes of tribes: values, belonging. Tribes have to be future focused. They have to have they have to ensure that they respect their specialized skills within the tribe. They need to be warriors, and they need to celebrate.
I love that, learners and teachers. And this goes back to the beginning of this conversation, where you were describing yourself, how you presented yourself to the organization and the people is like, man, I could use all the help I can get. So I see kind of the flip side of that is, hey, I'm learning how to do this, and I'm going to continue learning. I'm going to teach you what I learn. And I also hope and expect that from you.
Exactly.
And empower them to be able to do that. Part of that is building in the values which empower them. You mentioned something that where there was a little bit of resistance when you were implementing these new values, where a little bit of friction with the instead of running it up the chain for decision making, the individual accountability. And so why is that so important, and how do you empower the team, the tribe, to be able to be accountable?
So you mentioned earlier words matter, and absolutely words matter. And that's why we took the word manager out of our vocabulary and everyone was called a coach. That's why we were leaders. That's why we had, values, not policies. But we created something called the Maniac Pledge. And this was something that we created to give people permission to be responsible. And the Maniac Pledge said, I am responsible for taking action, asking questions, getting answers, and making decisions. I won't wait for someone to tell me. If I need to know, I am responsible for asking. I have no right to be offended that I didn't get this sooner. And if I'm doing something others should know about, I am responsible for telling them. So what that Maniac Pledge did, it was a pledge of permission. So when someone they didn't have to ask for permission now to ask for something or to tell something to somebody. So, and you notice the third word in this is I am responsible, and the last word says I am responsible. So we were able to use the Maniac Pledge, and we just socialized it and talked about it, and this is a great antidote for a very, very serious disease that's in organizations. You may know it's called the na disease, the finger pointing disease. And I used to talk about this in the same way I'm talking to you about it. I didn't camouflage the issue with confusion to make out how smart we were. I said, I don't want nanas. I don't want Gomer Piles. You remember Gomer Pyle? Surprise,
Yeah.
surprise. So we used to name things. I don't want nanas. I don't want Gomer Piles. I want, us to be very clear about what behaviors are going to work in the organization and what aren't. And we're going to be tough-minded and tender-hearted. We're going to have serious conversations. We are not going to protect our own comfort zone at the expense of other people's development, because that's what a lot of people do. They protect their own comfort zone because they don't want to have the conversation about the toxic element that got into the petri dish. But you have to have that conversation in a caring, sharing, and loving way.
Right. Because if not, then it's going to grow and it's going to get worse and get harder to get rid of.
It's going to kill it.
Yeah. And it is uncomfortable to have that conversation. I mean, there's so many great books that are written on that concept, Crucial Conversations and Radical Candor and all of these people addressing. I had someone on this podcast named Curtis Morley who teaches about something called counterfeit emotions, where he says that every emotion, every authentic emotion has a counterfeit that's masquerading. And the counterfeit emotions lead us in this spiral, a continuous spiral eating on themselves, where an authentic emotion moves us upward and forward and in progress. For example, and I'm getting somewhere, I promise, a comparison between pain and misery or shame and guilt, where guilt actually moves us toward connection with somebody, where shame tells us we are nothing, we have no value, and it kind of brings us down. Well, one of these that he teaches is nice versus kind. And a nice person is going to avoid having the difficult conversation. They're going to beat around the bush. They're going to not face it. But someone who is kind, they're going to face it. Kindness might not be comfortable, but if somebody loves and cares about you enough, they will be kind enough to have the conversation with you. Or I might be on the receiving end of someone showing their kindness to me and realizing where I need to make a change.
100%. 100%. And I had a huge learning moment around that. It was a kind of an aha learning moment for me where I was in a situation and I needed to have a conversation. And I said to myself, Garry, you're a fake. You say you love these people and you love them and you want them to be successful. You're a fake. You're not brave enough to have this conversation because you're protecting your own comfort zone. And that was to me that moment where I went, okay, you're right. I have to have a kind conversation for only one reason. I want this person to succeed in what they do. I want them to excel. In the book that I wrote with Ken Blanchard, our byline is, I'm not here to mark your paper. I'm here to help you get an A. And I think most of these conversations that are uncomfortable is because we haven't clearly defined what an A looks like. In other words, if I know what you expect from me and you know what I expect from you, then, and there's clarity around it, the conversation doesn't become a confrontation, it becomes a teaching moment. And Dr. Amber Selkin, who was the team's mental performance coach at Notre Dame, and she now works with the Denver Broncos, she has a wonderful thing around accountability. And she says, accountability is doing what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it, to the standard you're supposed to do it. And I think, in my reflection, in most cases, when we have to have a confrontation conversation, either one or two of those elements have been left out of expectation. You weren't clear what we wanted, we weren't clear how we wanted to do it, and we weren't clear when we wanted to do it by.
You you keep using the term learning moments.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what would be, I mean, I already know the answer to this because you talk about it all the time, but you've eliminated a word from your vocabulary and replaced it with learning moments. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, the word failure.
Okay.
So failure is one of the most, the most disabilitating beliefs we have in life. I don't see people running down corridors of organizations yelling out, I'm a failure. But when you think about it, life is all about failure. But if we turn that failure into learning, then life is about experiences. So we said we don't make mistakes, we have learning moments. And the definition of a learning moment is a positive or negative outcome of any situation that needs to be openly and freely shared to benefit all people. And if you think about most things in life, think about the number one baseball player. How many hits do they get out of 1,000? Well, 300 or so, but there's 1,000 balls coming at them. And interestingly enough, WD-40 Company was born out of a learning moment. Back in 1953, the company was called Rocket Chemical Company. There was a problem with condensation and corrosion in the umbilical cord of the Atlas space rocket. The chemists at the company at that stage started to get together and formulate product to try and solve the problem. So Formula One didn't work, and neither did Formula 39, nor did 1 to 38. But guess what? Formula 40 worked, and that's why it has its name, Water Displacement 40th Formula, WD-40. So I was able to link the learning moment to the history of the company, because if they'd given up at 39, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you, and there'd be a lot more squeaky doors out there.
Yeah, and when you change that vocabulary, how and do you have any examples of learning moments where people felt freedom to where otherwise they might have called that a failure or a mistake?
Yeah, I had to build trust. And when I first introduced learning moments in the organization, it took about a year for people to get comfortable that this wasn't going to hurt them. So what we did is I said, okay, I'm going to run a year's campaign here, and I want you to email me, or I guess email was around then, it was, yes. I want you to email me your learning moments, and I'm going to, identify one person a month or whatever. And at the end of the year, we're going to have a big prize where we're going to send you and your partner on a business class trip around the world to visit our offices. So in the first month, I got a couple. Why? Because people were testing the water. So what did I do with the people that sent it to me? I made heroes out of them. And then the next month I got more. And then by the time I got to the 12th month, I was getting people sharing hundreds of learning moments, because first they had to test the water. Is this going to be a gotcha? Or is this truly authentic? Is this truly going to be used to help us be better? So people have to adopt something, adapt it, and then get into the behavior. But as a leader, you have to prove your trust in them and their trust in you.
It seems to me that feeling that confidence, or feeling that somebody trusts me, I'll speak for myself, is one of the most liberating feelings that I could have, is feeling the trust of another. And so what did you see company-wide that was tangible once people felt that trust?
Vulnerability. They were happy to be vulnerable. They were happy to share, knowing that they weren't going to you know, be punished. Now, let me be very clear. A learning moment is not a get out of jail card. I mean, there are two types of learning moments. There are ones that are made in the spirit of entrepreneurialism, experimentation, truly trying to, and then there's an unacceptable learning moment where, people label it as that, but it was truly a flaw in competency, or, some, so it's not a get out of jail card. Now, fortunately, we didn't have too many of the unacceptable ones, but if there were, that was a redirection conversation that needed to be had, or maybe the person needed to increase competency in some way or another. So how did we help them do that?
Well, and I imagine that those learning moments were not just from sometimes the unexpected, you know, otherwise mistakes, but also the positive results that you could celebrate, that they
Oh yeah.
learned from either direction.
Oh, we used to, and we were very, very vocal about people sharing their positive learning. What did we learn today that's positive? Now let's amplify that to the world so that our tribe mates in other areas of the world can take that and run with it. Why should they have to discover it again? So, it was both. Remember, I said it's a positive or negative outcome. Now, remember also, I didn't say negative first. I said it's a positive or negative. I didn't say negative or positive.
Yeah, you're very deliberate in how you approach these things.
Absolutely.
And it seems like it didn't take you that full year of that campaign to change this, where little by little, by the end of the year, it seemed like you had it had kind of spread like wildfire.
At the end of the year, we had a movement, and that was
Yeah.
great because we're about
Ooh,
building movements.
yeah, I love that term. You talked about tough-minded and tender-hearted and finding a balance between those. And I believe you said something about the tough-minded and tender-hearted
Yeah.
approach to
The
leadership.
genius is in the end,
Hmm.
because if you have a leader that's far on the left-hand side of being tough-minded, they're not effective. I don't know if I've introduced you to Alec or Al. You
Let's
know,
see. There, type A.
this This is Alec, could be Alice, the soul-sucking leader or soul-sucking CEO. And Alec or Alice is on the far side of tough-minded. If you think about this person, they have a big ego. Their ego eats their empathy instead of their empathy eating their ego. They're a micromanager. They think they're corporate royalty. They want a fear-based culture. They're a master of control. They're a know-it-all. They don't like learning. They must always be right. They hate feedback, and they don't keep their commitments. This is Alec or Alice, the soul-sucking leader, who's far on that side of being tough-minded. Now, in the middle, you have someone who has a balance. And if you think about, someone who was a servant leader, they love and involve their people. They're always in servant leadership mode. They're expected to be competent. They're connected with emotional intelligence. They can read the room. They love learning moments. They have a heart of gold and this backbone of steel. They're champions of hope. They know micromanagement is not scalable. They do what they say they're going to do, and they treasure the gift of feedback. Now, you can have someone who's far on that side as well, but if you have someone in the middle who's both tough-minded and tender-hearted, that balance is so important because, I often say also you've got to have a heart of gold and a backbone of steel. I mean, all the CEOs and leaders that are listening out there, they know it's a lonely job, and you've got to have that balance.
I hear that all the time, that it's a lonely job being a CEO and finding that balance. You described it earlier when you found Ken Blanchard and you said something about everything was in here in your head, but he was a large part of teaching you that the heart needed to be part of that. This tough-minded and tender-hearted. I mean, it's that same. It's the 1,000-mile journey between your head and your heart.
Yes.
Sometimes it feels like it's that far.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'm involved with a company now called Heart Count, and our tie line is stop counting heads, start counting hearts.
Ooh, that's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, so stop counting heads, start counting hearts,
So when you
because it's
hear
hearts that
that,
come to work every day.
yeah, when you hear that, I heard someone on a podcast, totally unrelated, but it changed the way I think about life and value when he talked about all the millions of animals in the Amazon, and he says there's millions of heartbeats, and suddenly I saw life differently.
Hmm.
And you just described that as when I'm in a room, count heartbeats.
Count heartbeats. You know, Bob Chapman from Barry Weinmiller said once, everybody who comes to work every day is someone's precious child. Well, I added to that. I said, everyone who comes to work is someone's precious husband, wife, auntie, uncle, child, nephew, whatever. And our responsibility as leaders is to help those people succeed. That's what we're there for. I mean, we're there to help others. I used to say to my leadership team, be under no misunderstanding. The only reason you're here is to help those you have the privilege to lead step into a better version of themselves. That's the only reason you're here.
And hopefully along the way become a better version of yourself. So I have a question for you, Gary.
Yes.
What do you have any daily mantras or reminders or practices to continue to become a better version of yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Because I'm hopeless, and in fact, I have on my little notebook here that I carry with me, you'll see there's a little note on that. I actually also have it on my computer. And I carry this with me all the time. And you would think a 68-year-old guy who was a CEO of a public company would be better than this, but I need a lot of reminders. So let me read this to you. It says, am I being the person I want to be right now? And who is that person? And I have a list of attributes that I want to be. I want to be grateful. I want to be caring. I want to be empathetic. I want to be reasonable. I want to be a listener. I want to be fact based. I want to have a balanced opinion. I want to be curious. I want to be a learner. And I want to throw sunshine, not a shadow. So why do I need that? Why do I need that? Well, here's my explanation. We are just these basic human beings bumbling our way down this pathway of life. And in the bushes are these thieves that run out and grab us, and they take us in the bushes. Thieves of anger and guilt and all of this stuff. And then for a minute we're in the bush and we might think it's okay. But when we remind ourselves what we want to be on that path, we run from the bush and get back on the path that's going to take us where we want to go. So that's one of the things that I do. It's there in front of me. It's on my computer. It's on my phone. And when I feel myself being pulled into the bushes, I pick it up and I read it. I'm like, okay, Garry, center yourself. This is who you want to be.
Wow, I love that daily reminder. Who do I want to be? And I imagine that helps you make any decisions that you're making throughout the day.
It does, and as does the filter of my purpose. That helps me.
Yeah. Well, there's so many positive aspirations that I see in that. You want to continue learning. You want to be curious. You want to cast a light, not a shadow. You want to be grateful. What does gratitude mean to you?
Life, gratitude is life. And Ken Blanchard has a wonderful saying. He says, life is a gift. Don't send it back unwrapped. So, gratitude is life.
I love it. So something that stood out to me is you read your daily reminder mantra note there. I don't know what you call it, but I have a similar thing where I read my daily declaration to myself. And after hearing yours, I might go back and revisit mine. That was just so inspiring. Is something that someone that you've mentioned is Marshall Goldsmith in the past. I don't know if we're in this conversation, but I've heard you mention him, and I've listened to a lot of stuff that you've done, Gary. Something that I've heard Marshall Goldsmith talk about, and people might get tired of this because I repeat it over and over, as he talks about writing a letter of gratitude to my past self, but also a letter to my future self. And I've done something recently where I kind of bring that future self closer to focus, where I say, what can I do today that I'll be grateful I did tomorrow? And that it's immediate enough and it's present enough that I can do it now. And I know that tomorrow I'll be grateful for. And that's helped me do some things that are not easy. That's helped me make some decisions that it's really helpful. So having that constant daily reminder of who I am, who I want to be, and then that gift to my future self who will look back and say, man, I'm so grateful for you.
Yeah. And as Marshall said, let it go. I mean, yesterday is yesterday. I mean, today is today. There's a great, I love the islands of Hawaii. We have a place in Kauai, and we are just there for 2 weeks. And I came across a Hawaiian, I guess, a process. It's called Ho'oponopono, and it's a way of forgiving yourself. And it's three questions. You say, I am sorry. I forgive you. Thank you. I love you. And it's amazing. And I actually have that on a post note in the dashboard of my truck because so many times I need to forgive myself. I'll have a thought and I go, no, no, no. I'm sorry I had that. I forgive myself. Thank you. I love you. And it's just a beautiful, tradition from Hawaii that is so simple. And it's amazing how relieving it is when you do it. And you say, I'm sorry for the situation. Or, I've had things come up in my mind from years ago. that have been haunting me. And I've used that and I've gone, you know what? I'm sorry. I forgive myself. Thank you. I love you. Move on. And if suddenly it disappears because I've released it to the universe.
Well, it's beautiful, Garry. I'm so grateful for your time, your words of wisdom, and I'm going to use that mantra, Ho'oponopono.
Yeah. Ho'oponopono. Look it up. There was a whole book written about it, but it's really pretty cool.
I'm going to do it, and I'm actually in a week and a half on my way to Kauai as well. So,
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, we have a place there and we're going to build a house there eventually. So we love Kauai. So
all
enjoy
right.
Kauai. It's waiting for you.
It is waiting for me. In fact, yeah, we'll have plenty to talk about with Kauai. I want to leave something for the next conversation. But Garry, thank you so much for the good you do. Thank you for leaving so many people better than you found them, including yourself.
Thank you.
And I count myself as one of them. I appreciate your time and generosity. Everybody, please check out Garry Ridge. Find his book, Helping People Win at Work. And I'm excited for your new book when that does come out. Remind us the title and when you expect that to be published.
So it's called well, let me find it here. There it is.
Any dumbass can do it. And this is not yet published.
It's up for pre-order right now. So if you go on Amazon, you can pre-order it. It'll be pub date is March next year. So the publishers are doing their magic work with it. But it's learning moments from an everyday CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. And Ken
Awesome.
Blanchard wrote the foreword for me.
Well, I'm excited. I'm going to get on and pre-order it now, and I will put the links for everybody else to pre-order that as well in this description. And everybody, thank you, Garry Ridge. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
I'm grateful for you. And until next time, good day, mate.
G'day.
Take care.